Hey everybody, Ryan Grant here and welcome back to the YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm basically going to be going over the past 6 months of my gym journey, how I've bulked 9 kilos and gained 9 kilos in just the space of a very short period of 6 months, and how I'm going to help you do the exact same and achieve it in a pretty um, easy fashion, in a pretty simple fashion. And a lot of the things that I did and that I made sure I had on lock, and all the tips and tricks and stuff that I used and that I found along the way, make things so easy. And not only that, but they are also so simple. It's so easy. So many people get the mentality wrong about how to progress, right? You want to make things as easy for yourself as possible. The moment you find something that makes it easier, stick to it, right? The gym is like an experiment, right? You find things along the way, you explore and you enhance your knowledge along the way, and that's how everyone makes it as easy for themselves as possible. Because don't forget, as I have said in many videos, the gym is, it's an individual game. Different people like to do different things. Therefore, finding out what works for you is super important. So there's going to be three main parts to this video. I have done similar things like this before, but there are some stuff in this video that obviously aren't gonna be repeated and copied and stuff. But the stuff that is repeated and copied, I hope it gets drilled into your brain. That's why it's getting repeated and copied, and that just shows the importance of these things that I'm going to be that are going to be on display, right? So enough of the waffle. I don't really want to bore you guys. Let's get into today's video. So the first aspect of how I gained 9 kilos in 6 months is pretty self-explanatory: diet. Okay, you're not going to gain weight without optimizing your diet and looking into your diet and taking care of your diet. Likewise, you're not going to lose weight without taking care of your diet and prioritizing your diet, because you've got to do very specific things for both. But in this video, obviously, we're talking about how I gained 9 kilos in 6 months. So we're going to be talking about, obviously the weight gain side of things, right? So obviously the main thing, right, is eating in a calorie surplus every day. The amount of people that have messaged me and that I have messaged as well that are in a situation where they're really struggling with weight gain, and they say they're eating in a calorie surplus, but it's either not consistent or it's not accurate. So many times this has happened, and I've encountered people like this. You've got to make sure your calorie surplus is consistent. And by the way, if you do not know what a calorie surplus is, if you are new to the channel, a calorie surplus is basically just the amount of calories you eat every day, or the amount required that you need to eat every day in order to gain weight at a steady rate. So let's take an example. So if I was to eat 2,000 calories every day, and that was the amount of calories I needed to stay at the same weight, therefore, if I want to gain weight, I've got to eat a little bit more than that. I've got to eat in a little bit of an excess. So you've got to eat around 2,250 to 2,500 calories every day, and you should be gaining weight at a steady rate, etc., etc. So that's what a calorie surplus is, and you've got to make sure you're consistent with it, and you've got to make sure that you're actually eating in a surplus. Because, and this is actually something I'm going to talk about right now in relation to people underestimating or overestimating or not getting their calories right at all. They are biased towards themselves. Even if they haven't eaten the calories that they should have, they still track it anyway. Or if they've eaten something, but on the app they see an option with higher calories, then they put that. Or they just add something else on to make it seem like they have eaten the calories. And that is not the way to do it, because all you're doing is just lying to yourself. You're completely lying to yourself, okay? You've got to be honest, you've got to be truthful. If you haven't eaten the amount of food required for you, if you haven't eaten your calorie surplus in a day, then that, if you actually stay true to yourself and you can identify that, you can analyze that. You can say, you can look back on your full day of eating and just your full day in general and say, why have I not hit my calorie goals today? What have I got to do better tomorrow? Or what have I got to do different tomorrow? It actually gives you an advantage when when you actually identify your slip ups, you accept your slip ups, and you give yourself feedback, right? Feedback loops are the most important thing for progress, right? Without feedback on what we're doing, we can't necessarily, take into account what we can do better and what we can keep to progress, and what we haven't done so well, therefore we can change to progress. Therefore, when we put these things together, you're going to be able to progress a lot more. So so being biased to yourself when tracking is not good. A really good tip that I like to use as well, just to make sure, right, that I've eaten all my calories day to day. I personally use MyFitnessPal to track, um, but when I track, a tactic I like to use is a buffering tactic as well. And basically, just to give you guys an example, so for example, if I had to eat 3,000 calories a day in order to be in a calorie surplus, what I would do is I would try my best to get between 3,150 and 3,250 calories a day in order to just stay safe and just 100% ensure that I've eaten any calorie surplus. And as I said, that amount of excess calories onto your surplus, it's not going to make a difference, especially if you make it a healthy additional calories, right? So they're the first two tips I would give for diet. And obviously, as I said, you've got to be in a surplus every day, and this is where all these tips are stemming from, okay? So the next one that I want to go over with you guys is I have had the exact same meal times consistently, right? And if you're a regular watcher on my channel, you will know how important this is. And you probably predicted, you probably went down to your betting store and you probably betted that Ryan's going to mention it in its next video. Well done, you've won some money if you've done that. But anyway, eating your meals at the same time every day is super, super important. I came across a comment the other day that said eating at, meal times throughout the day is bullshit. Well, I'm going to completely counteract that because that is not bullshit. As a matter of fact, in my experience, this is probably the top two most important things I've done in order to gain 9 kilos in 6 months. So the reason why eating your meals at the same time every day is super important is because us as humans, we have a hormone in our body called the ghrelin hormone, right? The ghrelin hormone is basically the hormone, to put it into simple terms, that tells our brain, it's got to be hungry, it's got to be hungry, we've got to start feeling hungry, therefore we feel a spike in our appetite. So basically, the ghrelin hormone is the appetite stimulant, right? And what happens a lot of the time, right, when people don't eat at the same times every day is that their appetite spikes at really random times throughout the day, finding it hard to, get consistent eating patterns and overall eat the amount of food required in order to be in a calorie surplus, because it is hard, it is challenging, and that is one of the main reasons why people can't gain weight, because of the severe amount of food you have to eat, right? And I'm going to get onto that in a little bit later as well. But the same meal times every day is super important because it helps us work with our body, right? This ghrelin hormone is going to start to recognize the patterns. For example, if you start eating breakfast at 7 a.m. every day, lunch at 12, your lunch or your AKA pre-workout meal at midday, or your post-workout meal at 3 p.m., or your dinner at 7 p.m., or a late snack at 8:15 p.m., right? The ghrelin hormone is going to start to recognize these patterns. Therefore, it's going to work in our favor. We're going to be working with our body, and it's going to give us an advantage because the more consistent we keep it over time, the more this ghrelin hormone is going to be like, I know when to tell the brain to stimulate the body's appetite and the appetite, right? And it's going to be stimulated at the right time. So when you eat breakfast at 7 a.m., you're going to be hungry. When you eat lunch at midday, you're going to be hungry. When you eat your post-workout meal at 3 p.m., you're going to be hungry. When you eat dinner at 7 p.m., you're going to be hungry. And when you eat your final snack at 8:15 p.m., you are going to be hungry because you have created these patterns that the body is able to work with, therefore giving you a massive, massive advantage. So an action item I'd highly suggest for you to do now, if you haven't got consistent meal patterns already throughout your day and you're just eating at random times, then I would highly suggest writing down now, mini meal plan, right? So, when are you going to eat your breakfast? When are you going to eat your pre-workout meal? When are you going to eat your post-workout meal? When are you going to eat your dinner? When are you going to have your protein shake? Etc. Etc. I'm not saying you got to have 5 meals a day, but that's just an example. And personally as well, just so you guys know, I was eating 5 meals a day for around 85% of this 6-month period. But that's just because I needed the 5 meals in order to get the calories in. And due to my schedule, so it may vary for you. You may only need 2 meals to get you know, to get the calories in. I won't necessarily suggest going that low, but I just thought I'd disclaim it anyway. So eating at the same times every day, super, super important. So on to the next one. I ate clean and I hit my protein goals every day, right? So The eating clean thing, it has taken me a very, very long time in order to actually want to eat these clean foods all the time, especially when I'm bulking. I would say it took me 3.5 years to get to a point where I was just eating consistently every single day. So if you're starting now and you're sort of struggling with that, then don't worry, it's fine. I was eating junk food a lot of the time, but to be fair, the junk food and that really calorie dense fast food actually helped me gain weight initially. So I wouldn't necessarily cut that out, and I'm going to get onto that in just a second. But making sure you're eating clean, just make, you know, because the clean foods are where the nutrients are. You know, the chicken, you know, the meats, right? The vegetables, the pasta, the eggs, right? The fish. That's where all the nutrients are, which is going to help you with training, recovery, and you know, inevitably muscle growth, right? So making sure you're eating nutrient dense foods at the same time is super, super important. And this brings me on to my final point in relation to diet and what actually helped me as well. So obviously I just said that I've got to a state now of where I just want to eat clean. I don't really want to eat dirty. However, as I just said, it's taken me 3.5 years to get to this point. And if you're watching this video, it is very, very likely that you have not been in the gym for 3.5 years and you're at a state of where you can gain 9 kilos in 6 months, because you wouldn't be watching this video if you were, right? So, really important lesson that I actually want to teach you guys is one has to be undisciplined to be disciplined. And this is such an important lesson that I learned, and I genuinely wish I learned this earlier. This is something like when you complete a video game, if you realize you had something earlier, you would be so much better off. This is one of them, right? To be disciplined, one also has to be undisciplined. And the reason this is basically because if you're disciplined all the time, you know, if, as I just said, if you're eating clean 24/7, you know, if you just got into the gym and you're eating clean 24/7, you're not having any, you know, sort of pleasurable meals that you used to really enjoy. Obviously that's really good, but another thing is you're more likely to reach a state of burnout as well. So making sure that every now and then you have that undisciplined, that's going to keep you disciplined, and that's going to keep you more consistent with the things that actually matter. So let me introduce to you guys the 80/20 rule, or you can call it 90/10, whatever you want. But basically, the 80/20 rule refers to you want to be disciplined with what you're doing 80% of the time, and not necessarily disciplined with what you're doing 20% of the time. However, I would argue that this should be 90/10, right? So you should be disciplined with what you're doing 90% of the time, and 10% you should be not necessarily that disciplined. And what I mean by this rule is with what you eat, right? As I just said, eating clean is super, super important for a good, healthy, clean bulk. But as I just said, it's taken me 3.5 years to get to this point. It may not take you that long, but it took me that long. So this is what I would suggest to you, right? Making sure that you have that healthy balance is going to help you build that consistency in the long term. Because as I just said, if you try to eat clean like I am all the time for 6 months, you're going to inevitably burn out because your body's not used to it, and you just haven't built up that consistency in order to sustain it in the long term, right? So making sure, I would highly suggest sticking to the 80/20 or the 90/10 rule, right? So basically just eating healthy 80% of the time or 90% of the time, and not necessarily eating that healthy 20% or 10% of the time. And another thing as well, these fast foods are good for gaining weight and bulking, right? One common misconception that is set out in the world today is that junk food is bad for you. And yes, obviously junk food is bad for you because it's processed, the nutrients, it's not a very nutrient dense meal. However, it is not bad for weight gain, right? Because obesity is one of the biggest crises, you know what I mean, in the world right now. It's being frowned upon, you know, all this shit food. However, if you're trying to gain weight, it is not bad every once in a while, okay? So just consider that, and that is done. Furthermore, there's one more thing that I want to go over with you guys about diet, and that is the bulking mentality, okay? So this mindset has helped me tremendously in the last 6 months, right? And this is something that I teach the guys in my community. It's going to be the top link in the description. It's basically a community that helps men, skinny men, bulk and gain muscle efficiently, and I'm working on more premium services right now where you can have more personal access to me. So if you want to see what that's all about, I've also got one-on-one calls in there as well. We can jump on call and all that stuff, but I'll go on about that later at the end of this video. I don't necessarily want to bore you, but the bulking mentality, this is something that is super, super important. So this is something that a lot of people don't think about as well. When people say eat big to get big, that is right to an extent, because obviously you're eating in a calorie surplus, so you have to eat more food. However, the bulking mentality, in order to truly crack it, to crack the code, right, is you want to minimize the amount of food you eat. You want to eat as little food as possible in order to get you over the finish line, right? So for example, you want to maximize the calorie density of your food, which in turn minimizes the volume of the food, or just keeps the volume as little as you possibly can, right? And I'll give you guys a perfect example. So my bulking breakfast, primarily over the past 6 months, was eating 6 eggs with 2 bits of toast. That is exactly what I started with. No cheese, no anything in the eggs, nothing. So that probably added up to around 650 calories, right? Which is a good breakfast. However, I made that a lot more dense through applying this mentality. So instead of the 2 bits of bread, I swapped those 2 bits of bread out for 2 bagels, right? And I know you're going to say 2 bagels is more volume than the 2 breads, but it's not that much. The 2 bits of toast, but it's not that much more volume, okay? The next thing I did is put 30 grams of cheese in my eggs. That added another 126, 130 calories. And then I also put a little meat in there of my choice. So salmon, chorizo, Iberico ham, whatever the weather, whatever I fancied that week, I bought, and I had it with my eggs. And that brought my meal up, and I had an orange juice as well, and that brought my meal up to around 1,000 calories. And that was just like that, a third of my calorie intake in my first meal, which makes it so much easier for me throughout the day, right? Where I don't have to necessarily stuff my face at night before I go to bed, and that's going to fuck up my sleep, because I've already just got a third of my calories down me in the morning, right? So that's just a mentality. It's not about eating big to get big. It's about eating as little as possible to get big. And looking at your portions every single time and wondering, what can I do in order to make this smaller but more dense and add more calories? And that is exactly what I'm doing right now. So I'm actually cutting right now. So I'm applying this mentality, but in the opposite way. So I'm looking at my meals and I'm like, how can I make this meal even larger, even more filling, and not necessarily add too many calories, right? It goes either way, and it's a very good mentality to adopt, right? So that is part 1 of this video finished, and that is diet. So now on to part 2, and this is all about the training, right? So obviously training is super important, because we do exercises in order to grow muscles, so you've got to make sure things are as efficient as possible. So I've got 5 bullet points written down on this piece of paper down here, which I think are extremely important, okay? So the first one, you obviously want to be performing the exercise properly. You want to be, as a beginner, as a skinny man just getting into the gym, obviously you're not going to be doing things right. To be honest with you, I'm over 4 years into the gym. I'm still mastering these exercises, however, they're clicking now, right? And it's taken me 4 years, so do not worry if they don't click straight away. One of your main focuses and one of your main priorities, not just physically but mentally in the gym, is just making sure you're performing these exercises correctly, right? Because if you're not performing the exercises correctly, or if you're not focusing on that, and you're focusing on other things like ego lifting and the numbers and just getting the repetitions for the sake of it, and not necessarily worrying about the form or the technique, that's not going to help you build up a mind-muscle connection in the long term, which is really important for muscle growth. But I don't want to get into it right now, because I don't really want to overcomplicate things. You're not necessarily going to be stimulating your muscle properly if you're not targeting it properly. Other body parts are going to compensate for the bad form, therefore that's going to hinder your progress in the gym. So you want to be making sure that you are you're working on just improving your form every time, right? And one main tip that I would give, actually 2 main tips that I would give for improving the form overall across the board. Obviously there's tips for every exercise, right? But 2 main tips I would give for every single one across the board is start light and go slow, right? Light, so you can actually have control of the weight and the weight is not controlling you. So for example, if you're doing cable bicep curls and you put the bicep curl, you put the weight stack at the full stack, then you're going to be using your whole body to jolt it. The weight is going to have control of you. You're not going to have control of the weight, etc., etc. So if you actually go light, you can actually control the weight. You can properly squeeze the muscle. You can keep your elbow in the same place because it's light. You know, it's not too heavy for you. Therefore, you can keep the proper form and you can actually start to feel, you know, the muscle working how it's meant to work. Okay. And secondly, you want to start slow. So on the way that you want to be controlling the movement, you don't want to be going fast. You don't want to be going fast like this because you're not necessarily going to be, you know, establishing a great mind muscle connection with your bicep, and you're not necessarily going to be efficient. So you want to be slow. You want to bring it up. Make sure you feel the squeeze of the muscle at the top, and then slowly control the bicep curl on the way down. They are two things. Start light, start slow. So now on to the next thing. Limit your distractions. Okay, I may sound like a boring guy by limiting your distractions. By all means, have fun in the gym, do whatever you want. But what I mean by limiting distractions is turn your phone on airplane mode, for crying out loud, or just put it in your bag, right? If you have someone that you need to contact in an emergency or keep on your line at all times in case of an emergency, obviously I can understand, you know, you don't necessarily want to do this. However, if you're not in that situation, please, for the love of God, don't let your phone distract you. Because what happens so much nowadays, and I see it in my gym all the time, is people go on their phones, or I've done this in the past, right? I go on my phone and I only intend to go on it for a minute, but because I get so sucked into it, because it's so powerful, I end up on it for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes or even like 15 minutes, right? And what this basically does is just completely messes up the session because your muscle isn't pumped anymore, you're going to be cold, your mind is going to be frazzled, you're not necessarily going to be in it just physically but mentally as well. And you're not necessarily going to be as locked in. And genuinely, from speaking from past experience, and I'm sure a lot of other people can as well, it just completely messes up your session. Okay, so that's one thing. No phone in the gym. And the only other time, and obviously you've got exceptions like I listen to music in the gym. And another thing as well, if you're timing your rest periods in the gym, you can use your phone. But just don't get distracted by messages. You know, Snapchat, Instagram, stupid shit like that that's not even worth your time. So yeah, that's the second bullet point for training. The third one for training um, is your efficiency around the gym, right? So you know, the hour before you go to the gym and the phase after the gym, right? So let's start with the phase before the gym. So first of all, this links back to diet, a pre-workout meal, right? You want to make sure you have a pre-workout meal around an hour and a half to 2 hours before you go to the gym, depending on how quickly you digest your foods and what you have, obviously. And this is just gonna, give you the nutrients you need, so it's gonna prime you for your gym session. So you consume carbohydrates in a pre-workout meal. That's the main thing for a pre-workout meal. And by the time the carbohydrates get released into your body, you're going to be at the gym. Therefore, you're going to have energy. You're going to be you're going to be able to perform at a higher state, and your workouts are going to be better, more efficient, and obviously that's just going to lead to more growth. And also the pre-workout mood as well. Not just about the diet and the meal, the pre-workout mood as well. Something that I like to do before some workouts is watch motivational videos on YouTube with guys I look up to training, or I just watch someone's training vlog, or I just try to get in the mood somehow. That is really how I like to get in the mood, watching training videos. Another thing as well, taking my creatine around 30 to 45 minutes before my session. If you don't know what creatine is, it's basically a supplement that doesn't just help you in the gym. It helps you. It helps your brain function, your cognitive function as well, which means you're going to be more focused when you get in the gym. And one of the best bodybuilders of all time, Dorian Yates, speaks on creatine as a supplement. Everyone from your sister to your mum to the person next door, they should all be taken because it is so good for you. As I just said, not just physically, but mentally. Okay, so if you want to look into what creatine is and just search it up on YouTube, but it's the most researched supplement in the world. I'm not giving you any steroid, it's a natural supplement. We produce creatine in our body, however, we don't produce it enough, so this is why we take this as an additional supplement. Okay, food is super important, and post-workout, as I just said, to be fair, the only thing that's important with pre-workout or with post-workout, I think personally, is your post-workout meal. Yet again, people say that the anabolic window and that the post-workout window is scientifically bullshit. Even if it is, and even if it's not a real thing, I don't really care. And the reason why I think it's still important that you make sure you get your post-workout meal in, you know, within an hour to 2 hours after your meal, is because you still need to, um, you still need to feed your body nutrients consistently throughout the day. And I personally think after a workout, you're going to be depleted. So it's one of the most important times to do it, right? So making sure you get your pre and post workout meals in is just going to enhance your overall training experience as well. And the final thing that I want to go into in terms of training is progressive overload. Okay, if you don't necessarily know what progressive overload is, it basically just refers to making the movements, the exercises, the training sessions more difficult for yourself as you progress. And there's 3 different ways you can do this. However, I'm going to only cover 2 because you don't need to necessarily do the third one. I'll say the third one. So the first one is increasing the weight, the second one is increasing the reps, and the third one is increasing the intensity. We don't need to do this yet because you're just beginning. We don't want to focus on training to failure and all of that because in all honesty, you actually can't focus on intensity right now, as that is something that comes with experience and that you have to do over time. So the first 2, weight and reps, right? When a weight starts to feel easy on an exercise, for example, if you do bench press with 40 kilos, 60 kilos, and it starts to feel really easy, you get to 10 to 12 reps, then what I would highly suggest for you is to, increase the weight to 62.5 kilos or even 65 kilos if you're feeling good, if you're feeling strong. And with the reps, you basically just want to be, getting one better than last week. So for example, if you're on bench press and you got 60 kilos and you tried to go for, and you got 7 reps, then this week you will have the mindset that you're going to get 8 reps no matter what, okay? And that is how you progressive overload efficiently. And as a matter of fact, in my free community as well, I have a free training program, a free push-pull legs training program that's really simple, really easy to follow, that the guys in there are absolutely loving. So that's going to be in the top link in the description. However, that is all I've got to say for training right now. So make sure you're prioritizing form in the gym. Make sure you limit your distractions, so don't be going on your social media, so checking your messages. Pre-workout mood, so, just getting yourself in the zone, watching videos, whatever it is. Pre-workout meal as well, and also a post-workout meal after. And lastly, progressive overload, okay? So that is now 2 out of 3 sections for this video covered, right? Now, onto the final one, recovery, right? People don't value recovery enough. People don't value recovery as being one of these 3 big pillars. But as a matter of fact, if you don't necessarily prioritize recovery, and if you don't actually consider recovery as one of these big pillars along with training and diet, then the training and diet sort of become irrelevant, or in other words, you're going to be self-sabotaging yourself, because when our body recovers, that is actually when the muscle grows, right? We do the work in the gym, but the real growth happens when we recover because of that work, right? And if we don't allow ourselves time to recover, then we're just completely like making the training and the diet not pointless, but just not as efficient as it can be, right? And we're not necessarily, well, we're basically going to be underachieving, right? So we've got to be making sure we're recovering. So the first thing that I want to say to you guys is, one thing I did over the last 6 months was listen to my body, right? There was a period where I felt myself burning out. So I took an entire week off the gym, which is called a deload week. Now, I wouldn't suggest you do this as a beginner. I personally did do my first deload week as for like over 3 years, right? Because I didn't necessarily need one. However, what I would highly suggest for you, the main lesson to take away from this point is just to listen to your body, right? If you're meant to train chest on Monday, but it comes to Monday and you feel so fatigued, your chest is so sore, and you couldn't think of anything worse to do than go to the gym, because your body is sore, you've got to listen to it, right? If your body is still sore, then that is the body trying to tell you, please give me another day off. We'll come back next week, or we'll come back the day after and we'll be fine, okay? Listen to your body. You've got to know the difference between when to push through the tough times and when to let your body relax. And that sort of divide between those two lies in how sore you're feeling, right? There's a difference between mentally not being with it and physically not being with it. If you're mentally not with it, but you're physically with it and you don't want to go to the gym, tough shit, you've got to go to the gym. However, if you're physically sore, give yourself a rest. Listen to your body. Listening to your body is one of the most high value skills you can do for the gym and for progression and for bulking and gaining 9 kg in 6 months, right? It's super, super important. And another thing that I want to go over with you guys is so many people have the misconception of that more is more, you know? The more times I go to the gym, the more muscle I grow. However, that is completely far from the truth. As I have just stated, you need to let yourself recover. You know, you need to let yourself have enough recovery time for your muscles to recuperate, grow, and be at 100% by the time you train them again the week after or in the next session, right? And in order to do this, right, I um, I was training 4 days a week. Now, to be completely transparent, I wasn't training 4 days a week for the entire time. I actually started training 4 days a week at the start of January. So from September to December, I was training 5 times a week. However, with my intensity that I've personally unlocked and I want to train at, that was personally too much for me. It wasn't too much for me back in the day because I had unlocked this intensity. However, I just felt myself burning out all the time, so I reduced it to 4 days a week. And personally, I couldn't recommend 4 days a week more to you guys, right? 4 days a week is the most perfect balance between training and recovery. And obviously, that's going to lead to muscle growth, right? Um, so that's how many times I was going to the gym a week during this 6 month period, and how many times I'm going to continue going to the gym because of my schedule, my recovery rate, my intensity in the gym, etc. etc. So, what I'd highly suggest for you guys is to go to the gym 4 to 5 times a week, ensuring that you get an absolute minimum of 2 days of rest every single week. Right, and now the next three things that I'm going to go over are things that you need to make sure you're doing on these rest days. So, number one, we're back to the diet, we're back to the nutrition. Nutrition is super, super important. A lot of people think of diet just for the the training side of it. However, if you're consistently feeding your body nutritious foods, and especially on days of rest, then that's going to help your body, you know, speed up the processes and speed up recovery. Therefore, you're going to be able to train a lot quicker and with a better efficiency when you get back into the gym, and you're going to be less burnt out. I can't express the importance of diet to training and recovery. Okay, so you know, protein shakes, protein, carbs, your healthy fats, it's all super important to enhance your rate of recovery. The next one, sleep. I cannot put into words how important sleep is. Well, I mean, if humans didn't sleep, we'd eventually die because of how important it is to our health and our sanity, right? So you've got to make sure you optimize your sleep, right? Make sure you're going to bed at the same times every day and making sure you're waking up at the same times every day. This is going to regulate something called the circadian rhythm. Every human has a circadian rhythm, um, and the more you regulate it, the better your sleep patterns are going to be. And as a matter of fact, when you're in your sleep, that is, you know, when your hormones do their thing. And if you have a good sleep and if you optimize your sleep, then your hormones are going to be balanced. Therefore, that's going to contribute towards your muscles recovering and actually muscle growth as well. Genuinely, it is so, so important. Professional bodybuilders, obviously, I know you don't want to become one, but I just want to make the point, right? Dorian Yates won the Mr. Olympia, aka the best bodybuilding competition in the world, 6 times, one of the best bodybuilders of all time. He was sleeping in the day for like hours. All he did was train, eat, sleep. The reason why he was sleeping so much is because it's so important for recovery and for muscle growth, and just to make sure that the hormones in the body are in check and balanced. It's so, so important, okay? And the final thing the penultimate thing that I want to go over with you guys is hydration. Making sure you're keeping hydrated is super important. And the main reason why this is obviously because, you know, water, the scientific periodic table equation for water is H2O, right? O, oxygen. right? The more water you drink, and if you keep yourself hydrated, the water is going to be, it's going to get around your system. And obviously, O is oxygen in water. It's gonna get oxygen to the places that are sore. Therefore, that's gonna help. That's just gonna help recovery, right? And another thing as well, the water is just gonna help flush out the lactic acids and the waste products that are lingering around in the sore muscles, which is just gonna flush them out, and you're gonna be fresh as a daisy, right? The final thing that I want to go over with you guys as well. This isn't just for the physical side of things. This is for the mental side of things, because the mind and the body are connected. So it's important we take care of our physical self and our mental self as well. So switching off, okay? I personally rest on Saturday and Sunday. Saturdays I'm filming this right now. I'm resting, and on the weekends I'll try and switch my brain off as much as possible, because it's so important um, for the training aspect of things. As I said earlier, if you're doing things 24/7, if you're trying, it takes, as I said earlier, it takes one to be, uh, as I said earlier, to be disciplined, it takes one to be undisciplined. If I was on it 24/7, doing work all the time, or training all the time, or, my brain was constantly being stimulated, I would inevitably burn out, right? And because the mind is connected with the body, that can also have an effect on the body. So it's super important we don't just switch ourselves off physically, but mentally as well. And that's just super important. Right. I don't know how long this video is, but it's a bloody long one. Thank you so much if you have stayed this whole way. It feels like I've been recording for like years. If you have enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like, leave a comment down below. And if you are still here, I would absolutely love it if I could invite you guys into my free community that I have been talking about throughout the video. Basically a free community to help skinny men bulk and gain muscle in the most efficient way as physically possible. There's a workout program in there. There's basically just everything you need as someone starting a gym to find their feet. Okay, you'll have personal access to me throughout the day. You can ask questions, you can ask the other people in their questions, you can help other people. Most importantly, I will be there to help you as well. There's also a free call in there. We can jump on call, discuss your problems, discuss your current situation, and I can personally guide you based on your situation to be making progress, to just get better and better. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'd absolutely love to help you in there, and I'm working on an absolute massive project right now, and if you go in the free community, you will see what that is all about. But without further ado, thank you so much for watching. Take care, have a good day, see you later.